Okay, so we've got this dream then. So this is the 9th of November 2025. There's a couple of dreams that had this happened this night. So that's say the 8th of November into the 9th. I'm just going to cover off one here because it's quite a full dream. It's actually quite a short dream actually to read out, but it's got a lot of meaning to it. And so obviously I want us to spend some time on that rather than going through two dreams and it being maybe somewhat diluted, let's say, or a very long video. I do tend to do that, to be honest. I mean, I don't tend to skip stuff just to get it in a shorter time. I'd much rather have a longer video and have the fullness of all the information that I feel is relevant. So I've had a couple of long ones, haven't I, in a row? So I thought I'd go over a shorter one here. So what have we got? We have, yes. So how this dream starts in. So what I saw was two men grappling, so wrestling, basically, specifically, and it was on like a standard sort of, like on a mat. They're standing there, hands on shoulders, grappling with each other and trying to get one to the mat, that kind of thing. I was a spectator, so the way I kind of see this all happening is from a distance. I'm probably about 10 to 30 meters away, roughly, and I'm watching this happen. But I'm assuming that I'm just a spectator of the dream, so I'm not an actual person necessarily standing there watching. Not that it's really all that relevant, to be honest, anyway. But I'm watching these two grappling, and I wrote down here the slightly smaller of the two men comes over, and it's like he's speaking to the camera, but again, it may have been somebody behind me. I didn't look behind me. I was just sort of watching him, as I said, like a spectator. But I noticed that his rib had actually punctured through, his, he'd sustained an injury, basically. So he'd sustained an injury where he had broken his rib in this wrestling to the point where it actually punctured through his body, and you could see the bone, poking through his sort of chest area. And then it was kind of like a lowerish sort of rib from what I could see. And I noticed that he didn't seem to be in any kind of pain at all. He was just, he didn't seem to be in any kind of pain. And what he was trying to do was actually just push it back in. I mean, I don't think you can really necessarily do that too easily with a rib, but so that's what it looked like. That's basically what he was doing, was pushing that rib back in. Didn't seem to be in any kind of pain. What I did notice was that while he was sort of looking down he wasn't actually really, there was a little bit of blood, but not much really at all. But the weird thing about it was that all the blood was coming from his back. So it's kind of like, well, it sustained an injury in the front, yet we were seeing a lot of the blood actually coming through from the back. And I could see it sort of like just dripping, quite quickly, as this man was sort of standing there. And I was concerned. I thought that this guy's going to drop in a minute because the blood flow from, like, I could see, because of the angle that I was at, I could see all this blood coming from behind him. That he was just going to drop to the floor out of blood loss soon. And that's pretty much, I think, all there was. Only to say, it was his left rib was the one that this injury was sustained on. Again, whether that's relevant or not really sure. I'll quickly go through but that's the end of the dream. Yeah, so a very, very brief dream. And the transparency element is just to say that I was that night, let's say, or the night before, was there anything that would have influenced my dream? Well, yeah, there was. So we'd gone out as a family to celebrate a family member's birthday, and we were all at a pub, just having something to eat. And the way I was positioned was we were at a set of a couple of tables, and to my left and to my right were two big TVs. And it's a kind of a pub where every time you go in there, they've got football on, they've got some sport on all the time. And so I was kind of flicking between the two. Actually, I was watching the football that was going on, so soccer, and then on the other one they were playing rugby. Again, very similar to American football, just without all the padding and stuff, but very, very similar. Obviously, rugby is a very, very much a contact sport. So they do have a wrestling aspect that's very, very similar to what I was seeing with the grappling, where they have what's called a scrum, which is where they kind of they all kind of have a line of them and they all smash into each other, and then they're kind of pushing backwards and forwards while the ball gets dropped in the center, and then they're trying to get that ball and then throw it back to one of them who's going to pass the ball and get the ball properly into play. You can get a lot of injuries as well in rugby because it is a full-on physical sport. And so I thought, yeah, sure, that could definitely have affected my dream where I've got somebody who's wrestling and sustains an injury, you know. But again, that said, I don't think that necessarily takes away anything from dream meanings and stuff like that anyway. So what actually happened? I'm going to... Yeah. So I don't need to refresh you on what just happened. So it's purely because I've recorded 2 dreams, you see, here, and there's a big gap, and I was explaining dream 1. So, one of the other dreams first. So that's where I was like, oh, should I do a recap? Well, no, because it's like a few minutes. So this, I would have said, for a lot of Christians, any Christians that would be watching, I think quite a few people are going to know where I'm going to go with this. Non-Christians, probably not, actually. So what this is talking about, I think clearly, is Genesis 32. The passages I'm just going to briefly summarize. So you've got Genesis 32 verses 24 to 26. It talks of Jacob, and you've got Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob would be the one really where the 12 tribes of Israel kind of come from. What they do, and that's from there is where is the birthing really of the nation of Israel. Okay. And within this there is the element of Jacob, who is actually wrestling with a man. So this all happens sort of like as an overnight thing into daybreak. So a wrestling match, let's say, with this random guy, you know, it's quite random the way it comes up in Genesis, and he's wrestling for hours. Is what you would assume, because it talks about all the way through to daybreak. And so he's alone wrestling with this man, and until daybreak. And this man, it uses the word touches Jacob's hip socket and wrenches it. There's lots of interesting uses for that word touches. It's a very widely used word from the Hebrew. I went into a little bit of a brief study on that yesterday, but I don't think it really had that much in it that I wanted to include in the video. This is, for clarity, this is not the first time I've actually recorded this video. This is about the 3rd time now, because I've been going down different routes and I've been thinking this isn't adding anything to it. This is just confusing things. So I left that bit. But if you want to look into it, the word touches is an interesting word. And hip socket, basically his hip that gets touched by this man who he's wrestling with, and Jacob basically refuses to let go of this man that he's wrestling with unless this guy, this man blesses him. So Genesis 32:28 talks of that man he's wrestling with that changes his name from Jacob. So it says, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with man and have overcome. Overcome. That's definitely not a word. Overcome. Genesis 29:31. You've also got here. So Jacob said, please tell me your name. But he replied, why do you ask my name? Then he blessed him there. So this, as in this man, this angel, blessed him there. So Jacob called to the place Peniel, saying, it is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. So what does all this mean? Well, this is the point where God renames Jacob to Israel, the person who all the tribes of Israel would come from. And the identity of the person of that person, Jacob, Israel, that he wrestled with, is interpreted as an angel, a theophany, which is a visible manifestation of God, or a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. We'll put in brackets here, Jesus. Okay. My personal opinion is that it's a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ, so it's in Jesus. But because Jacob says, he said that he saw God and lived, which to me does not suggest of an angel. Although there are similar aspects. So the bit where he says, "Tell me your name," so you do hear that, you do see that actually with a lot of the angel interactions. Tell me your name, and they don't tell the various different people their names. I think personally, when I've been reading that the reason for that is probably because of, if they had, maybe that person could have put up a statue or worshipped that person, that's worship Michael, the Archangel Michael. He told me his name was Michael, and I'm going to worship him. Obviously, you do find all these names out and stuff, but and so do the people of Israel. But in the actual points of interaction, it's, why do you ask my name? So that's where you could see, oh, okay, that's very similar to an angel and the interactions that you see around angels. But I don't personally think it's an angel. And I don't also recall that you've had ones where people have seen an angel and they've said that they've seen God, whereas this does suggest that. So, because obviously he says, I've seen God and lived, so it's very, very different in my mind, because you don't see that anywhere else, to my knowledge anyway. I don't recall anybody identifying an angel and then saying that they saw God. The Archangel Michael, for example, the Hebrew being Michael, means who is like God. So again, clearly they've identified it's not God, but who is like God. Okay, so they're aware it's not God. So I also find that the word usage of in Genesis 32:28, where it says, Jacob wrestles with God and humans. So while I think of it, it's talking of him wrestling with, you can say it's wrestling with God, as in wrestling with, the promises of God and stuff like that, and the mission he's been given by God. He's also victorious over humans as well, but more like it echoes the kind of God-man of Jesus, who at this point, of course, was not incarnated into a human, but appears as a human. So angels appear as humans, or quite a lot of the time. So and they, again, I think, appeared solid, to the touch, all that kind of stuff. So they're not all ethereal, where there's spirit and you can just put your finger straight through them. So this event also marks the change of Jacob, meaning the supplanter, somebody who takes somebody's place, to him being renamed to Israel, one who struggles with God. So again, referring to this wrestling sort of aspect. So Jacob receives a wound following him previously relying on himself. Now he relies on God, and the hip injury maybe is kind of like a reminder of the event, the struggle that he went through. Kind of like, he's always going to remember this, because of this injury that he sustained. There'll be a constant memory, a reminder of that. And he also demonstrated perseverance over this wrestling, knowing that he was not wrestling merely a human, as he was seeking a blessing and wouldn't give up. So while in the dream, it was a broken rib, obviously, and not a hip, this does have further relevance, I feel, in my opinion anyway. So why the rib that would be broken? Well, carrying on my understanding, with this wrestling match being with the pre-incarnate Jesus, Jesus Christ. Well, what was Jesus's last wound on the cross? Well, it was the spear from the human, It's not even close. Roman. So from the spear from the Roman soldier who pierced his heart through the ribs. Given that the target was Jesus' heart, and our heart is obviously on the left-hand side as well. So again, I mentioned, when I was writing the dream down, because I'd written that down obviously in my phone. Not sure if this is relevant. It was a left rib. Well, the left rib is protecting our heart, isn't it? Which is on our left-hand side. So I think it did have relevance. So yeah, the last wound, obviously, Roman soldier pierced his heart through the ribs. Yeah, and the injured rib, let's say, was actually the left one. So that was what he was pointing out. I try usually with my dreams to write down even the smallest little details, because you don't know how much of it is actually relevant. So I did write that down as to the left-hand side. And sometimes I think my level of detail sometimes can actually throw off things that may well be predicted things that happen, and I go a little bit too far sometimes, maybe. And then things that happen that are almost exactly the same as my dream happen, and I think, oh, did I go too far with my prediction to the point where now maybe that did happen? Maybe there was a prophecy of some sort, and it's not. But again, I go into the level of detail and my thoughts as much as I can. I'd rather be like that than claim things future that were off a little bit. Because as I said, I've had that at least 2 times, maybe even more. Yeah, I think more, actually 3, but it doesn't matter. I'm not going to go into all of that. But the blood and water coming out of Jesus, so the blood gushing out of this guy. So again, it made me think of that similarity, that he's got this injury to his rib, that say, and then this blood pouring out, absolutely pouring out. Yeah, so it's like a fatal wound. So yeah, it made me think very much again like the spear to Jesus through the rib. And now I'm right. Yeah, as I'm writing this down, I'm literally writing as I'm writing this down. It's so clear to me that that's what that is. That is, I'm getting that conviction as I'm writing it, of that is definitely the meaning, of this dream as well. So also, what the rib points to is Adam in Genesis, because Jesus is also referred to as the last Adam as well. So again, you get the Jesus connection to the Adam connection. Okay, so yeah, this point. So also, what the rib points to is Adam in Genesis, who God put into a sleep and removed a rib. Again, and he put into a sleep, so he didn't feel any pain. Again, that's the same as this guy who's doesn't seem to be in any kind of pain. He's not asleep, of course, but he's not in any kind of pain. It's like he's sedated. So that's what it kind of makes me think of as well. So yeah, so in Genesis, yeah, so he's put into a sleep and removed a rib. Technically, rib is somewhat inferred, or because actually it's identifying more the area of the body. So the Hebrew word that's used actually is more commonly used side rather than specifically rib. But again, we use rib because of it says about taking bone from his body. So yeah, it probably was the rib. Highly likely it was the rib. But the word itself means side, and that can help with helps with a double meaning aspect that I'll go through here. So here's another picture then. So with Adam's side being pierced, and from that, so the rib part, birthing Eve. Okay, and then which is also a picture of Jesus' side that is pierced, and that event then births the church, who's his bride. And of course, Eve is his bride, which comes from a piercing of his side. So it's a big connection. Now, I personally thought this was absolutely amazing. I mean, it is amazing. I thought I'd found something there that I've never heard anywhere. I googled it, and it came up. I was like, oh, okay, I've never heard of that connection before. But apparently that is something that clearly Google knows about. The connection between that parallel of those two circumstances being, the same thing. The piercing and the birthing of humanity, and then the piercing and the birthing of the church, his bride, and Eve being his bride with Adam, of course. So yeah, impressive parallel there. So the creation of Eve is in Genesis 2, verses 21 to 22, and Jesus being pierced is in John 19:34. But prophetically, I wanted to go into this aspect. So prophetically, all of this was written hundreds and hundreds of years before it happened. So you've got Isaiah 53, verses 5. So I'm just going to read this out. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Also, you've got Zechariah 12:10, and I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication, and they will look on me, on whom they have pierced. They shall mourn for him as one mourns for an only son, and weep bitterly over him as one weeps over a firstborn. It's so incredibly obvious that that's Jesus. Psalm 22 verses 16 as well. So there's another one that's widely acknowledged as being as talking about like Jesus being on the cross. It says, so Psalm 22:16 says, for dogs surround me, a company of evildoers encircle me. They have pierced my hands and my feet. My hands and feet. So obviously, I think obviously that's showing a crucifixion, right? They pierced my hands and my feet. Doesn't sound like a standard injury, does it? The earliest records actually of crucifixion was around 519 BC. So that's for anything kind of large scale, recorded large scale. It could have originated with the Assyrians or the Babylonians. So again, this is all taking information off on online, basically. I'm writing down here because I wanted to give you some evidence that crucifixion was not used even remotely close, really, to when these are all written down. Some of them, certainly, but the earliest records, were around about 519. But it's done on a large scale. Could have originated with the Assyrians and the Babylonians. Babylonians, like in the I think it's the 500s BC. Assyrians, I think, in about the 700s BC, roughly. I think that's right. The king of Persia, so that's the empire that comes after Babylon. So you've got the king of Persia, Darius I, actually crucified 3,000 political opponents in Babylon in 519 BC. So that's this example of large scale. But there are other cases, I'm sure. But Isaiah, you've got Psalms as predate this, obviously, by quite a long way. Certainly the Psalms I just mentioned, Psalm 22:16, talking about his hands and feet being pierced. Because that, was, I think that one was written by King David, but all the Psalms are around about 1000 BC. So it's expected around about 1000 to 1044 BC. Is around the kind of time frame that this was written. Isaiah is of the 8th century BC. So it's well before these kind of punishments were commonly known. Way before, obviously, the empire of the Romans, who actually used this as a punishment method. So way before. I'm going to go on actually now to talk about a personal testimony to a certain extent of the injury aspect. Okay. Now, obviously, I've been talking about the injury that Jacob sustained. Where he got an injury to his hip, and then he's limping afterwards, and that's an ongoing reminder of this interaction he's had here with God. Okay. So I'm going to go through a personal testimony as well here. So where are we? Blah, 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 blah. I'm just trying to find where it starts. Oh, actually, I'll just mention something very, very quick. So, so I'm just going to mention this about Jacob. So Jacob wrestled with God, and his hip was injured, so he never forgets. Yeah, he never forgets what happened. And the people of Israel have commemorated that basically ever since. They do not eat the tendon that is actually attached to the socket of the hip. So they never eat that because of it, this being this commemoration. So Genesis 32:32, oddly, at the same time, that someone from my Bible group actually got a sporting injury. It was actually a badminton sporting injury. where he tore his Achilles tendon. Oddly, not that we had talked about it, but I actually had an Achilles tendon tear as well, but I had that in my 20s. So this was like, let's say more than 20 years ago, because I'm 44 now, and it was before I met my wife. So I would have been, let's say, 20, 21, 22, something like that. I had an injury. It was a stupid, drunken injury. Really, really stupid. And what basically that flared up. Now, I've not really had that injury flare up, to my knowledge, really, since I've been in my 20s. And then in the very, very same week, the guy from my Bible group, he tore his Achilles tendon. I didn't know anything about it, actually. My Achilles tendon started to play up. I started to get this really nasty pain in exactly the same spot. And it's still on. I say ongoing. It's somewhat ongoing. So I wrote down here, it started in November 2025, and I wrote here presently in January 2026. I've still got this pain. It has eased off now. We're in March. It has eased off actually quite a bit. But that's the first time I actually recall a sustained period of time where my Achilles tendon has been painful. I mean, I've used to do kickboxing and stuff like that, so it's very, very physical, obviously, kickboxing. So I've probably had I've probably had a little bit of pain with it in the past, but nothing sustained. But this was sustained for months. And oddly enough, it did start hurting again over the last few days, where there had been about a month, I reckon about a month, where I was okay. But I just found it interesting that he tore his Achilles tendon. I then had this flare-up, sustained flare-up with my Achilles tendon, which I haven't had really in about 20 years. That happened in the same week. I wasn't aware of this injury either. It was actually, this person hadn't turned up, and it was like, oh, okay. And I might have been on the first time he didn't turn up, or it might have been the second, that I found out, oh yeah, he had a sports injury. It was he overstretched, basically he was playing badminton and overstretched, and in his stretching, it just tore his Achilles tendon. I was like, oh yeah, that's weird, because that's actually, mine's flared up and it hasn't flared. I haven't had that in 20 years. That's odd coincidence, But as I said, that was just a personal testimony. Now, I was going to go through a sinner's prayer. I'm going to do that again. I have done one recently. I think it was the last video, actually. I'm going to go through it again because I was quite profoundly moved by this dream, because of, it took me to all those massive scriptures of Isaiah 53, Zechariah 12, 10, where it's talking about Jesus, and I felt like this would be a good point to go through it. Also, if I combined it, you see, with the other dream, it probably would have been a lot more impactful, but it would have been closer to an hour or more on the dream. So I just wanted to split it up. So, but I'm still going to put the sinner's prayer in here. So this would be just a case of you writing this down as I say it, and then reading it out yourself. Okay, you have to verbalize it. Okay, and this is you speaking to God. It's a prayer, of course. As I said, it's a sinner's prayer. So you would say, God, I know I'm a sinner, and I know that my sins have separated me from you. But God, I believe that you love me. And because you love me, you sent your son Jesus to die for my sin. I believe that when Jesus died for my sin, that my soul... Sorry, let's try that again. I believe when Jesus died for my sin, his soul went to hell to pay the penalty for my sin. But I also believe that when all my sin was paid for, God, that you raised Jesus from the dead, and therefore his victory over sin can also give us victory over sin. Jesus, I believe in you, and I thank you for saving me. I add on a little bit extra here, which is just to mention something along the lines of, come into my life. Please, God, provide me with the Holy Spirit to now guide me, shape me, and be with me forever. Okay? that's so I do put sinner's prayer in inverted commas on quite a few different videos, every now and then at different sort of touch points. But I thought that I would put that on here. I wrote it down here, put sinner's prayer. So I thought, well, I'm not going to go against what I've put there. So put it in there, despite me going through one yesterday. Okay, right. I'm going to do the next dream, I think, next. Hopefully you found this one interesting. I thought it was absolutely fascinating. It was such a small dream, opened up so many big scriptures. They are big scriptures. Genesis 32 is a well, all of that kind of time is a very profound part, really, of scripture for sure. And again, Isaiah and all these other parts. Okay, good to get some stuff in from Genesis, because that doesn't really come up all that frequently. It tends to be a lot of revelation. Yeah, but no, not this time. Okay, I will get another one all sorted for you. See you on the next one.